Pete Steinberg, welcome to the Way of Champions podcast. Jerry and I are honored to have you on.
I'm excited to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Well, the three of us have gotten together to talk about not only your new book, Leadership Shock, but your extensive record in the rugby world as a national team coach, World Cups, Olympics, you know, 11 national championships on the collegiate level and so much more. So I think we have a lot of ground to go into here. But what I'm fascinated by, sort of to learn, is your quote day job, right? your your day job, it was really in sort of leadership development on the corporate level at the same time that you're coaching elite level rugby. We get a lot of people who are coaching and then they go into that, and so it's one or the other, but you were doing both sort of side by side. What, talk about your journey of rugby and corporate leadership development at the same time.
Sure. So, I'll keep it short, but as you can probably tell, I'm not from America, not from the US. I grew up in England. That might be less sure for anyone that's listening because I came over in 1994. So I've lived more than half of my life in the States, but came over to go to grad school at Penn State, but also to play rugby. I found out that graduate students couldn't play for Penn State, which had a very good rugby program. Bit of a shock when I made that choice. My dad was American, so I had a US passport. So my end goal was to play rugby for the US, mostly because I was a mediocre rugby player in England, but I knew the US wasn't very good, and maybe I could do that. So I found myself at the age of 23 coaching, and really fell in love with it and became a much better coach than I did a player. Spent a couple of years not getting my PhD in geochemistry, and then got a job in the business school. And this is where things kind of like started to come together. Spent 6 years in the exec ed department. And this is where executives from around the world came to Penn State for a week to learn about marketing or finance. And Penn State brought professors from around the world to deliver it. And it was my informal business education. And through that process, I started already making connections between sport and business. I was actually taking things that I learned in the classroom to my rugby teams, but I was also bringing in particularly coaching and the team development piece that I was learning in.
Pete, we lost you. Maybe turn off your video if you can hear us.
Have a
Pete.
I'm back.
Yeah. Why don't you just turn off your video? Yeah, that just totally dragged
Yeah.
there. So
I'm not sure. Unfortunately, John, I'm not sure it's a bandwidth issue. I think it might be like something going on in my neighborhood issue, but we'll see. Hopefully it's a bandwidth issue.
Well, let's just sort of start that again from them inviting the executives over at the business school. Does that sound good? So let's give it a pause and then you can jump in. Give it a 5-second pause and then jump in.
So I worked in executive education, and that's where executives came to the business school to be able to have short courses on finance and marketing. And I already saw connections between things that I could bring from elite sport into the business world and also things from business that I took into elite sport. And then in 2001, I decided to start my own company because I wanted to support my rugby habit, which is sort of like, if you want to prepare for the Olympics, you've got to take 3 months off. There aren't many businesses that can do that. But if I ran my own business, I could say, hey, I'm not available in May, June, July, but I can work for you like in September. And that kind of worked. And that's how I kind of made that connection.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. And so, I mean, what did you bring from the rugby world to business? Maybe that's part one. And then part two, what did you bring from the business world to rugby?
Yeah. So from rugby to business. So rugby is a little bit different than most sports that Americans come across in the sense it's very player-centered. So when I coached in the 2017 World Cup, while the game was going on, I sat in the stands. And I tried to communicate through our physical therapist And then but mostly the players had to make decisions both strategically and tactically on the field.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also had to manage themselves and manage their team culture while that game was going on. So there's a real connection and with how you lead and how you need to empower your team. So coaching rugby is just this huge empowerment exercise that you have to go through. So bringing some of those processes about how to get buy-in, how to empower decision-making with teams was one of the big things that I brought, along with, team development, team identity, some of that sort of cultural work. I think that was probably the pieces that I really that I brought over. And then the other way, a lot of it was around strategic planning, also use of data and identifying key KPIs, creating vision. Those are some of the things. All the teams that I ever coached, once I got into the business world, had fundamentally a strategic plan, a vision about what we wanted to do, objectives, and then strategies on how to fulfill that. And that's something I brought the other way.
Love it. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting as you talk about that kind of stuff. And it's one of the things that I know I love about rugby is that that the intelligence has to be on the field. It can't be on the sideline. And so that affects not just game day, but that also affects how you coach all week. I mean, I remember reading Legacy just about the All Blacks, and I gotta imagine most rugby coaches would do this, was that Monday's practice might be very coach centric, but by Friday it's really got to be player led because Saturday is going to be player led.
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking to Emily Bidewell, who's the coach of the Olympic Sevens team now, someone that I coached, and I was sharing with her, I was asking her about stress. So when I coached the 2017 World Cup, I think I may have used the sports psychologist more than the players. And part of it is when you get to Friday afternoon, your job's done as a coach.
Yeah.
And stress as a coach is really driven by what you can't control.
Yeah.
And so what happens is that your stress actually peaks at the end when you've done everything. And that's where, and then I would replay the week and I would replay everything that we did. And I would be, am I like, did I do it right? Did I not do it right? I really struggled to let that go. And so I think I actually think coach wellness is the next generation of wellness that we're going to see. I think player wellness, I think there's a lot more understanding about that. But I think coach wellness is a real challenge. The coping mechanisms that coaches have and the support that they have, they're supposed to just take it. When I was way more stressed as a coach than I ever was as a player when it came to competition. Yeah. Because in rugby, I had no control over what the players were going to do. So that's really what made it very stressful.
Yeah. I want to get into that coach wellness thing. I just want to ask one last final question on this idea. So for those who don't coach rugby or don't understand, right, you're sitting in the stands, and so sort of like after a pregame talk, you do get a little time at halftime. But that's kind of it, right? Like it's not the basketball coach calling timeouts.
No timeouts. Yeah.
No one's you're not joysticking anyone around.
Yeah, John, I'll give you a great example, and it's one of the last games I ever coached, right? And it was the 2017 World Cup, and we'd made it to the semifinals. The US hadn't made it to the semifinals for 20 years, and we were playing New Zealand, that are called the Black Ferns, and best team in the world. They go on to win the World Cup, and we're playing them in the semifinals. And we have a great first half. We're losing to them 10-0. If you don't know rugby, the scoring is similar to football. So 10-0 is close. It's a close game. And we have a penalty right in front of the post, right? So in rugby, if you kick that penalty, it's like a field goal. That's 3 points. Half time, we're one score, 7 points behind, 10-3. We can really go in and be like, guys, we can win this game. We should kick the points. The players choose not to kick the points. The players choose to try and run in the score and try and get a try, which is really, really hard, right? And of course, last play of the game, we don't get the points. We're now deflated because we had this chance at halftime and we had to bring them up. If we kicked the points, they'd have been up coming in. That's a great example of how I wish, as a coach, I could have impacted that decision, but I couldn't. And actually, as a coach, what I do is I said, what is it like? There's something that we didn't do. that didn't prepare them for that moment to be able to make that choice. Right. And it's probably because we never thought we'd be in that situation against the Black Ferns.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Though
And
that's
so
a
that's
game.
a
I mean,
great
that's a
example.
game management situation in any game, regardless of
Exactly.
who you're playing. But
Yeah.
then that also changes your halftime talk, right? Of we're not down a score, we're down two. But you also can't come in at halftime and be like, what were you thinking?
No, completely.
What are you doing?
The
We should only be down a score. Yeah.
The other benefit of being in the stands is it takes you like 3 or 4 minutes to get to the locker room.
So you can unwind.
So, me and my assistant, no, I mean, this is what we do. Me and my assistant coaches is on that walk. We're talking about what's the messages. One of the things I learned when I started coaching the national team was, in the cauldron of competition, players can only take in so much information and only change so much. And this actually relates to business in the same way. Like you're in, a very intense moment in your business work, like trying to redo everything at that moment isn't what you can do. And so then you really have to choose what are the two things that we want our players to walk away with and the two things they're going to do differently. And how do we take them on that journey so they feel confident about making those changes in what is really like 7 minutes or 8 minutes that we have with them. And so that's like learning how to manage that moment becomes really critical in the rugby world.
Yeah. There's a great quote by the political strategist, James Carville. I don't know if you know who he is. His same haircut as I do. Nice bald head. He worked for Bill Clinton, who used to love to go on these tangents. And he said, if you make 3 points, you make none. Right. And I think that's just a wonderful halftime advice, whatever. Like you just, stop. Like what are the 1 or 2 most important things that are going to have the biggest effect on what we're going to do here? Right. And then you might pull a player aside and speak to her and be like, hey, for you, I noticed this.
Exactly. And that's exactly how we did it. And I think the switch for me came as a coach when I realized that in my halftime speeches, I was saying things for my benefit, not for the players' benefit. Like I wanted to say it because I felt it had to be said, versus I was saying it because it was actually going to drive change and it would actually help the players perform better. So as soon as you switch from a coach centric to a player centric, you're like, geez, like they don't want 10 things. Like they really want one thing, right? And so we would be like, hey, we want every player to have one thing individually they could do, one thing as a subunit, which is like a different piece of the team that they could do. And then not everyone needs to know what we want to do differently. Just your team leaders need to know what we want to do differently. So you have to segment your team and say, hey, I don't have to say everything to everyone. We need to say these specific things to these specific people to change what's happening on the pitch in the second half.
I had a guy send me, I think it was his master's research in, I don't know, it might have been sports psychology on halftime talks. And he's an Irish guy and he's working with Gaelic football players. And he sent it to me. And it is really interesting, because he was doing post-game interviews of like, what did coach say to you at halftime? Right. And the amount that was remembered is negligible. Right.
Yeah, right.
So if it's like, hey, if it's a tactical change, right? It's certainly as a soccer coach, right? If we're changing the formation, they're going to remember that. Right. But these little nuance things, that just goes in one ear and out the other often.
Yeah. And that's why it becomes, you have to be really intentional. And again, the relation to business, this is exactly the same thing, and when I coach business leaders, is I'm like, if you give 10 pieces of feedback to someone that's on your team, they're only going to do 2 of them. So if you give them 10, you don't know which 2 they're going to do. So don't give them 10, give them the 2 that you actually want them to do and just leave it at 2. There might be 8 other pieces of feedback that you want to give, but actually the more that you give, the less control you have over really helping that person perform at their best. So here are the 2 most important things. Just give them those 2. These other 8 aren't important.
Yeah.
Like they're really not, like, yeah, there are things they didn't do there, but that's not important. The important thing, you're giving feedback, not to share the negatives or not to share it. You're giving feedback to change behavior. And if the reason why you're giving feedback is to change behavior, you would only give 2 things.
Yeah. Yeah. So much. Jerry, I know you wanna jump in here.
Well, I mean, I'm just in awe of the conversation. I can just sit back here and listen for the whole hour, but I got too much to say to do that. So, Pete, Pete, the next thing I'm going to see is you showing up in Santa Cruz. We seem to be following each other around. I got my doctorate. I got my doctorate at Penn State.
Oh my gosh, that's
and
awesome.
then from there I met my wife at Penn State, and then where she went, and then I moved out to Boulder, Colorado. And so when are you going to come to Santa Cruz? That's my question.
I have Jerry. I should connect you with a mentor of mine out in Santa Cruz who's a big rugby guy.
Oh,
But I
absolutely.
could see myself, I could see myself living in Santa Cruz. Like right now, I have young kids. Like one of the things that I did is I didn't have kids till the end of my so I'm sort of a bit weird in the sense that
Yeah.
I could have been playing. In fact, if I was able to play at Penn State, I would have probably continued to be a mediocre rugby player and would never have had this coaching career.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's sort of like it's like one of these moments. But
Well,
I coached for 23 years and then had kids, which is great because it means I'm not traveling all the time like I did and felt guilty about family. What's sad is I'm now 52 and I've got a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old and I'm tired all the time.
So listen, I'm quite a bit older than you, and I got 4 kids all in their 30s. How about that?
Yeah.
And
there you go.
Yeah, right. But that's a great segue to something I want to say. I have 2 questions or 2 statements to make. One is based on what you just told me. One of the things I found fascinating in the book is your dedication. I always read, as a writer and an author myself, dedications are very important to me. It tells me a lot about the author. And one of the things you say there, and I quote, is "Daddy always comes back." What does that mean? What is that about?
So, I get paid the most when I go and stand in front of a client. And therefore, when business is good, I travel a lot. And to me, it was about creating reassurance, especially when my kids were like really young, like 2.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, my 7-year-old gets it, although she's not always happy when I travel. But it's creating reassurance that, hey, like it's what I say when I leave. I say, Daddy always comes back. Like I'm leaving, but I always come back. So it's what I say to my kids when I leave.
Yeah. Well, it's also kind of a built-in mechanism for not micromanaging your kids, which is probably one of the conversations John and I would have for a long time, right? Micromanaging kids. We can't micromanage in rugby. As a coach, we sit in the stands. However, there's something about the ability to be able to do that. And I'm going to segue into this question. I had a conversation with Steve Kerr, who you're aware of, out here in the Bay Area, and I asked him the question. So, Steve, what was the most important game that you won during that first championship season? And of course, he could have gone to one of maybe 5 different places. Oh, Jerry, it was the game when we were playing OKC and we were down 3-1. We could have gotten knocked out right then and there. But you know what? He didn't say any of that. In fact, there was no hesitation. And I want you to comment on this with your experience. Is he said, Jerry, the most important game that I won was the relationship game. Now, it seems to me, if you're going to be a rugby coach, in order to not micromanage, in order to take your position in the stands and let them play, you're going to have to create some amazing relationships. I'm just wondering what your take on that, if you can unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, and I completely agree that that's really, really critical, and you really have to build trusting relationships. But I mean, I'll tell you something that so I never allowed a player that I coached to call me coach. They had to call me Pete. And the reason is I didn't want a hierarchy. It is not me telling you what to do. It's us working together to make sure that we can play, that you guys can play your best. I think the idea of ownership is really important. And so the players own the team. So since I've been doing work on the book, I've talked a lot about rugby, but last summer in July, I took a bunch of senior KPMG partners, they're one of my biggest clients, to the Elite Athlete Training Center in Chula Vista and got them to spend a day with the women's rugby team. Because the team I used to coach, and the coach there was someone, so I know them, and they were just blown away, and they had this amazing experience. But there were people there that I'd worked with for 5 years that didn't know I coached. And part of that is, I don't think it's imposter syndrome, but part of it is it was never my journey. It was always the player's journey. It's the player's team. It's the player's journey, and I'm there to help. And I think if you have that attitude, you build relationships with players, because the players, and if you're authentic about it, the players are like, this is someone that can help me get to my goal.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, so, or our goal, and if you position yourself as someone that can help the players meet their goals, then that's the foundation of a really strong relationship. The second thing that I would say is, because I never wanted a hierarchy. I mean, I like to say feedback is the fuel of high performance. Like when you're coaching Olympians or national team players, the big thing they want is feedback from you, because they want to improve. And so what I instituted in the work that I did is that whenever I gave feedback to a player, they had to give me feedback. Right. So we would be like, hey, you need to work on your tackling. You need to be able to do this. We need you to do that. And then it would be like, okay, tell me, what am I doing well? And what do I need to improve as a coach? And I think, again, creating that journey is a mutual journey to excellence.
Yeah.
Without that hierarchy is really important when in rugby. I mean, I would argue, again, that's a direct translation as a leader in a business. That's this, like, hey, we're here together. My position doesn't matter. I'm here to help you meet your goals and meet our goals.
Yeah. I was just going to say, it just reminds me, Jerry, right? Karch Karai, who would end his individual meetings with, how can I be a better coach for you? Right. Like that same thing, right? Like, this is not one-way communication. Sorry, Jerry, I interrupted, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, good point, John. What I was going to say is, hey, Pete, you have kids, and, there's a lot of people who are listening, many people who have children out there. What a great idea, too, to carry it over into the family. One of my favorite things to do as a dad, and this is when the kids got older and they could really, really respond to this. I would say to them, so, I'm very honored and privileged to be your dad. What a wonderful joy it is for me. And then I would end that sentence. I would send them a text, and I would say, what are some of the things I can do to be a better dad for you? And, they give me feedback, just like what you're talking about. And I would be a better dad because of it. And not to be afraid, to be open and vulnerable. Basically, the interpsychic message is, I'm not perfect, and you don't need to be either, but we're in this together. We're in this together.
Exactly.
And I want to be a great dad for you. And so I'm going to listen to you. Oh, if I can do this, this, and this, I'll be a better dad. Yeah, sure. But of course, if they came up with something like, I want to go get ice cream more often or something like that, I mean, that doesn't make sense, right?
I mean, I think it's what you're doing, Jerry, in that moment is you're role modeling. And I think role modeling is really powerful, right? And I think it's interesting when you try to create these, and especially at the elite level, as much as I try and minimize the hierarchy, I'm still going to make selection choices that will impact the career of the athlete, right? And so it is only when the athletes can be truly honest with me, the person that impacts their career, right? When they can be honest with me and tell me I'm not doing something very well, that I know I have a trusting relationship, that relationship is strong. Because and that takes time. Like the first time you ask that to someone you've never coached before, they're not going to be honest with you. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, you're the best coach ever. I've never had a coach like you. Can you please select me? Right. That's kind of, but over time, and by the way, you need to act on that feedback. You can't receive feedback and not act on it. You have to receive that feedback, and then you have to be intentional about how you act on it. So they see, wow, the feedback that we gave, I think it's good. I also think you need other mechanisms for feedback. You need anonymous mechanisms. You need, at rugby, we'll often have, and you probably saw this in Legacy, we'll have, a leadership group that people can, you need multiple avenues for people to have a voice. And And the way I bring that onto business is, in business, I talk a lot about citizenship. Often I'll work with organizations and they'll say, well, we need better leaders. I'm like, do you need better leaders or do you need better citizens? Like people that are really engaged in the community that they have. And citizenship is really being a great teammate. Often citizen, requires hundreds of people. So it's hard to call it a team, right? Because you're part of a broader community, but it's really like, how can you be a really great teammate? And part of being a really great teammate is having agency in the experience that you have. So having some feedback and voice in what your experience is, I think is really powerful to create that team bond.
Ooh, so much there. I mean, my goodness, I want to get into that. And I love this idea of citizenship, because as a citizen, sometimes you're asked to lead and sometimes you're asked to follow. Right.
Exactly.
And that's it. Right. And this is, I think, one of the problems is everyone's told, well, you just need to be a leader, but you can't have 32 leaders out there. It just becomes a jumbled mess. Right. Sometimes you just got to close your mouth and follow. Now, in these conversations with your players, I mean, I just had a conversation yesterday with a very high level collegiate lacrosse coach, who's having a difficult time having a player understand that, the way she is currently, in the past with the players they had in the team, she could fulfill a role that got her a lot of playing time and scored a lot of goals. And now with new personnel and some graduations, it's just a different role, and it's not, it's not working as well. And so how do you navigate those conversations when the person disagrees with you? I mean, they could say, give me some feedback, and you say, I want to play more. Well, that's not the type of feedback that's going to make me a better coach for you. You're going to have to earn that. So how do you navigate those difficult conversations? You have trust, but I mean, if you're, I don't know what a rugby roster has on it, but if you've got 15 on the field or you're playing sevens, you got 7 on the field, you're disappointing a lot of people every single game. Because everyone wants to play.
Yeah.
So I mean,
it's interesting. I think a strength and a weakness I had as a coach is that I actually didn't care that much about rugby. What I cared about is the individual's development as a person. And you see this, I've been rereading Legacy, and I've done some work with the All Black coaches that are in that book. And Wayne Smith is the guy that came up with better people make better All Blacks. And so to me, I see it as an opportunity for that athlete to grow. So I think there's 2 things. One is, if you have a really strong team identity, then those athletes, what we did is we dealt this with care, right? So we asked the athletes, how do you want to be informed about selection? Selections in rugby get made 2 days before the game, right? And so you say, how do you want to be informed? And what we did is that we would do it via email. So they would know when the email was coming out. They could be in a space, whatever space they wanted to be, and they could deal with it. And we'd send it out in the evening with the expectation by the next morning, their focus is now on team performance. And if your team identity is strong enough, you can be like, I didn't make it. And in some moments in my career, they would actually, the non-selected player would and this is something the players would come up with, would go to the selected player and say, how can I help you?
Wow.
How can I help you prepare over the next 2 days? Right?
That's amazing.
How can I help you? Because that tension between these two probably good friends, right? How can I help you be better? And the second thing is, we said, from the moment that the selections come out, our focus is on the performance of the team. We are not going to sit down and talk to you about how you can be selected, because we have 2 days before we play England or 2 days before we play Canada. We will have that conversation the day after the game. So now they know that they're going to get that feedback, and they know that we're going to have that conversation. And I want an athlete to be like, no, I should play. I'm like, great, that's exactly what your attitude is. Right. And so they know that that's coming, but our focus, all of our energy has to be in performing in that game. And then after that game, the players that play do their recovery, and the players that didn't play get their feedback. I would say there's two ways, and I actually always love difficult players. Like I remember having a discussion with one of my assistant coaches about an athlete, and he was like, she takes up too much energy, right? And I said, well, actually, she's difficult, but she's not disruptive. If she was disruptive, you can't be on the team. Disruptive is you're impacting others. Difficult means that she's struggling to maximize her potential. I'm here for her. The easy players, they don't need me.
Yeah.
Like they're going to go off. They're going to be good. They're going to be good in life, right? But the difficult players, if you can help them unlock their potential, then you can have a real impact. So those difficult conversations I always look forward to, right?
Yeah.
And at some point, you know, and you bring data to it.
Yeah.
Right. So if you can bring data to it, and you never talk about the other athlete. It is never actually about how can I beat that player out. It's like, how can you be the best you can be? Maybe you get selected, maybe you don't get selected. You can't control that. But let's talk about how you can be the best you can be. Right. And I think that's how we dealt with it.
I mean, I love that. It's so, because again, of course you're hurt. Of course you're upset. And that team agreement that when the team's named, all right, if I wasn't selected, I go to support, because especially with women, they're very conscious of that relationship with the teammate who have outcompeted this week, right? Or have taken the spot. So that team agreement that no matter how disappointed I am, it's my job to go, how can I support that player? I mean, that is just, that's huge. You said, you know, this relationship, this individual is your strength and your weakness. I think, you know, in your weakness, like, because I feel like that's how I coach as well. And sometimes you make decisions that aren't the best for the team because it's good for this individual. And if you do that in an Olympics or you do that in a World Cup, you could get knocked out. And that's a really hard thing, knowing I care so much about this relationship I have with this player, but I'm really going to have to disappoint him today and not play him at all.
Yeah, I will. So a couple of things about that. I mean, it's a great comment, John. When I led the team to the 2014 World Cup, I went in with the attitude, I want this to be a transformative experience for the athletes. And if we make it a transformative experience, they'll play at their best. And we didn't play at our best. And I think what I realized walking away from that is I was coaching to my goals and not to the athletes' goals. Right? The athletes want to win. That's what they want to do. And you can, and I think there's a difference between having a great culture, which is what we had in 2014, and having a performance culture, which is what we had in 2017. So a great culture, they loved it. That was a great experience. Like they loved each other. They had this but we didn't perform at our best. And I think the difference is feedback and accountability. I think feedback, like really like being, and those things are kind of connected, but really doubling down on those two things. And then getting clarity from the athletes that we will make the decisions that help us win. And I'll give you a very, very different, so I'll give you two mini stories about 2017. So the Olympics was in 2016. I ended up being an assistant coach there. And so our athletes in 2014, all of our best athletes went to the Olympic Training Center and became full-time professionals, right? And most of the other teams around the world, 15s was more important. So all of their sevens players came and played with them. But in America, the Olympics was more important. So in 2014, we only had one of our sevens players, one of our professional players, and we couldn't compete. So in 2015, I sat down with the 15s for the professionals, and I said, we have to make a choice. When we go to 2017, like, do we want to bring our sevens players with us? Which would mean for the next 2.5 years, this group is going to train. And then 6 months before the World Cup, about 8 of you are going to get cut so we can bring in these athletes who are really good. I mean, it'll be somewhere between like 5 and 10. We would bring them in and they would take your spots so we could win. What do you guys want to do? Now, what do you think they said?
We want to win.
We want to win, right? And I'm like, okay. So this gives me now the permission structure for me to do it. I could have done it anyway, but if I didn't have the permission from them, the dynamics of that 6 months before the World Cup would have been terrible. So that's what we did. And so we brought in, I think we ended up bringing 7. It's one of the reasons why we got to the final. They played one game against Canada in April, and then we went to the World Cup, and we had a philosophy of every, we would play the same team for every game because this team hasn't played together. We were a little bit lucky with the draw. We had easy games at the start, harder games at the end. And we're like, this team hasn't played together, so we're just going to select the same team over and over. So we go to the World Cup, and there's one athlete that was part of that group in 2015. She's been a leader on the team, and she's coming back from injury. And it's kind of touch and go about whether we take her to the World Cup or not. So I decided, because she's been a leader on team, to take her to the World Cup. And then when the first selection comes out and her spot is taken by one of the sevens players, she basically checks out. Like she goes off by herself at practice. She doesn't come to practice. And it was like, that like we had a discussion, do we send her home?
Mm-hmm.
Right? She is not living to the values and expectations that we set as a team. Do we send her home? And I'm a little bit like you, John. I'm always like, I'm like, I want to do what's best for the athlete and what's best for the team. We ended up having a long discussion. And again, we did this with leaders of the team. They saw it. Everyone saw it. And the leaders went and talked to her and said, look, we want you to stay, but you need to change the way you're behaving. It's getting in the way of our performance. Right? And so if you want to stay, then here are the expectations that we have. And she stayed. She didn't start any of the games, but she came on. She was a contributor. And, it would be interesting to go back and ask her what that experience was like for her and what she learned from it. But to me, I'm sure she learned that, like, okay, I need to, I can't put myself first here in this moment.
Yeah.
And so moments like that happen all the time. And then the last thing I would say, and this is the relationship piece, and this is really tough for me. There was a woman that I taught rugby to when she turned up on the Penn State campus, who was a very, very good player. And she was the last cut of the team in 2014 for the World Cup. She quit her job. She traveled the world. She tried to play as much rugby as she could. She was the last cut of the team on the 2017 World Cup.
Oh.
And for our last game, which was like the third, fourth place game that no one wants to play against France, no one wants to play that game, right? You lose the semi-final, and then you have to play that third, fourth place game. No one wants to do it. We had an injury. And she was actually supporting the team in France. And we could have pulled her in, put her on the bench, given her a jersey, and given her 5 minutes. And like have her reward her for all the work she had done to be able to play in a World Cup. But if we did that, it would take away from another player that had been on the squad the whole time to get on the bench and get that 5 minutes. And it was harder for us. It would have been easy, like positionally, to bring the player that didn't make it in because it was a straight swap. Where if we did the other way, we had to like have some people play maybe a little bit out of position, and we had a long discussion. And what we decided, the players and the staff, was that we were going to reward the player that had been in the team, right, the whole time. And I still don't know if that was the right decision. Like that still hurts me. That relationship with that player that never made it, it's done, right? Like it used to be close, and now it's gone. And that,
have you ever gotten to speak to her or tell her this? Because I think, sometimes athletes think coaches are, we're just robots with no feelings and, and we're cold hearted in these things, when in actuality, we think and we, just over and over, and it just keeps us up all night. I mean, I'm sure that decision to leave her off both times kept you up all night long, right? Yeah. And that decision to have that conversation, just you dreaded it. And that decision in that moment, I mean, it's all like, she may resent you, but you're still suffering from that decision 7 years later.
Yeah, I haven't had that conversation with her, like and I think what's really interesting about it is that if I was going to go and have that conversation, John, that would be about me.
Yeah,
it wouldn't be about her. And so I'm like, I don't want to put that on her. I don't want to go to her and ask her forgiveness. right? Like we've both had the experiences that we've had. They've both impacted us in ways. And I hope that, I don't know. The funny thing is, she might be like, "What are you talking about, Pete? Our relationship's fine."
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, I just know it from my side. I don't even know it from her side.
Yeah.
Well, if I were her, and I had her email address for something, I would let her know that this podcast is going to be dropped.
I was thinking,
and then
she can listen to this.
Absolutely. And then she will hear, as I hear and John hears in your voice, the vulnerability, the authenticity, and the genuineness of your feelings. Not what you're saying, but how you feel. And that would be easy for her to pick up. And that would be an option for her. And I think that wouldn't be a bad idea. I don't say that lightly. I think that sometimes this could be a modality by which she hears your genuine, vulnerable, authentic voice, and then takes away whatever she wants. It's in her court, and who knows where that leads. And otherwise, I think that will be on your mind for a long time.
Yeah, that's true. I appreciate that.
And this really goes into the coach wellness piece, right? This is coaching right here. I mean, when we talk about player wellness, this is coach wellness. And so Pete, talk about that. Like, talk about coach wellness. And I know Jerry's going to have some comments on this as well, but like, this is the key right here. Like, these are the things, right? And oftentimes, I wrote this blog post a while back about this idea of don't be a starving baker, right? And the starving baker, bakes the bread for the village, and everyone loves it so much that he needs to do more and more and more, and he stops taking care of himself and stops taking care of his family, and all of a sudden he can't cook for anyone because he's a broken man, right? And this is what so many coaches can become. We give and give and give, and what gets left behind, our own children, our own marriage, our own health and well-being and exercise and all that, because all we do all day long is give to the cause. And so talk about coach wellness.
Well, and this is actually linked to the book, in the sense that I think authenticity is really important. So when a great coach called Kathy Flores coached the national team before me, and when she sat down in 2010, I didn't apply for the job. And a woman called Christy Ringenberg, who was a current player, and all USOPC national governing bodies need athlete representation on the board, and she was on the board at the time. And she called me up and she said, "Why haven't you applied?" And I said, "Well, I don't care about winning enough to coach the national team. Like, it's not important to me." And she said, "Look, we've had these conversations. You think you could do it well. I think you should do it well. You should apply." So I applied. And, like I said, when we went into the 2014 World Cup, it was about the experience of the players. But when we went into the 2017 World Cup and it became more about winning, that's when I needed the sports psychologist. It wasn't authentic to me. It wasn't something that was really like I wasn't coaching the way I wanted to coach. And when you're not authentic, that's when it's not sustainable, right? And it was a choice, and it was a choice driven by the players, right? And I was okay with it, but I just found it very, very difficult, and my wellness suffered because of it, because I was making choices that weren't really true to who I was as a coach, even though it was the right choice. And so I think really understanding your purpose, right, and the strengths that you bring and what you're trying to accomplish, and truly understanding that at a deep level will allow you to coach I mean, I coached Penn State for 19 years, and I could have coached for another 10, right? It was energy giving, because the way I was able to coach there was so genuine and authentic to my beliefs that it was always energy filling. Coaching the national team wasn't. And I remember talking to a former Canadian national team coach who's like, you don't really want to be a national team coach. And of course, I was a young up and coming coach. I'm like, yeah, I do. And then when you do it, that would be exactly the same conversation I would give. I'm like, no, except I would just say it comes with a sacrifice at that elite level. I don't think it would be hard. You talked about Steve Kerr. It'd be really interesting to talk to, the coaches that have had careers at the elite level to be like, how do you sustain yourself and how do you remain authentic to what your beliefs are when there are so many other demands on you, and where winning, the outcome is the only thing that's important. It's the only thing.
Fascinating. I mean, I just as you're saying that, I'm thinking of like Herb Brooks, the Miracle on Ice hockey coach, and most people are familiar with that story of how he sort of, united a team and their sort of dislike of him in order to, win an Olympic gold medal or whatever. And and the people who knew him said,
I'm gonna just, but John, that's where the outcome, I think, I don't know if that's a great process. They won. I don't know if they won because of that process.
Right.
Like, this is where, I often will stand up in front of clients on the business world and tell them that sports is a terrible analogy for business, because the outcome is the only thing. Like, if you win, you're good, and if you lose, you're bad. I'm like, I want to see the team that loses, but continues to excel.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Buffalo Bills to go to 4 Super Bowls in a row.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great team.
Yeah.
Winning and being good is easy. Losing and being good is a real test of your culture. So I have, and this is why I think sport is such a challenge when we look at role models, because we look at a role model because they won, and then we say, what did they do? Versus actually, what did they do to be great?
Mm-hmm.
And then did it lead to them maximize? Like, I am most proud of the 20 I think I can say I'm most proud of the 2 games I'm most proud of are 2 games that we lost.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. Like where we maximized our potential. We played the best we could play, but we lost. But I mean, and we've won I've coached teams that have won lots of games that haven't played at their best. So I have a struggle with the outcome focus that we look at when we look through sport, and not the process. So I cut you off, John, when you were talking about Herb Brooks, because I just wanted to.
No, and that's
the conversation, right?
I think that's very fair, right? And if they had played their best game ever and lost 5-4 to the Soviets instead of 1, would we look at that whole story different? Of course we would, right? We have, there's a great quote I share a lot from the American football coach, John Madden, who says winning's the best deodorant, right? And it's like,
I love that.
When we win,
that's exactly right.
When we win, we tend to ignore all the things that are really bad about this. But when we lose, we look at it, under a microscope. And so, I mean, certainly, Jerry, I'll give you the word, Jerry, because, we work with our teams on exactly what you talked about, Pete, the process, excellence, getting better, marginal gains, whatever you want to call it, winning the day, bit by bit by bit, day after day, getting better. And you know what? Sometimes on the scoreboard, you get knocked out, you lose in a shootout, you whatever, but it's still an unbelievable season or an unbelievable tournament or whatever it was.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so much to unpack here. I love this conversation. What we're looking at here is, for me, so much of sport, so much of business is a performance identity. And what you guys seem to be throwing back and forth is the idea of a purpose identity. And I think as long as we can stay focused, performance identities are not sustainable, and they're not safe. Your job is on the line. You could win your conference and get fired. It's not sustainable and it's not safe. Whereas a purpose identity in a culture is something that is sustainable. It feels good, and it puts the focus back on the process.
Right.
How, not what we're doing. Let's see if I can express this. It's not what we're doing, it's how we're being.
Right.
Are we being connected? Are we being caring? Are we being empowered? Are we being genuine? Are we being authentic? Are we being vulnerable? And I think mental health, boils down to either that environment is either safe or it's not safe. And for a mental health perspective, a safe environment is one where low levels of pressure, anxiety, depression, and stress are experienced. And an unwell society, an unwell culture is one where those four items are off the charts crazy. And that's true whether you're an athlete or you're a coach. If a coach is feeling pressure, anxiety, depression, stress, and all of that, it's not good for anybody. So it's got to be a community, or a community of citizens, to quote Pete, a community of citizens who work together for a higher cause, something much bigger than winning and losing.
Completely.
And
Completely.
the frustration for me, I've been at this for close to 50 years. And the frustration for me is that it still remains at the professional level, at the collegiate level. We're looking at outcomes and results, and we're measuring our self-worth. As parents, we're worried about our kids getting the next train to Stanford, as if that's going to solve all the problems in the world. We're so obsessed with outcomes and results that we're missing the whole point and purpose of what Pierre de Coubertin said many, many years ago, why the Olympics even happened. It's something much. Go ahead.
No, Jerry, you're like this. I love this. I literally had this conversation with a parent recently, like a friend who has kids, whose kid is good at soccer, and so he wants his kid to play soccer all year round. And I'm like, and his kid is 9 years old, and I'm like, that's just not good. Let me share it, like all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, what's the point of sport? Mm-hmm. What is the purpose of sport? The purpose of sport is to give people the skills to be successful in life. That's literally the only purpose. Now, yeah. I mean, or historically the only purpose. Now the purpose of sport for some people is to make money, right? And it's a business. But fundamentally, sport is there for young people to help them learn skills that can be successful in life. And it's really the only purpose. It's the only reason a 9-year-old should play soccer. Mm-hmm. It's the only reason they should play. If they play for any other reason, any other outcome other than their growth and development as an individual, they're going to be disappointed. They're going to get burnt out, and they're just losing the opportunity that sport can provide.
Yeah. It is an opportunity. And the irony or the paradox, Pete, of all of that is, if the kid is having fun, and that's the main reason why kids play sports, it's not so much the parents' goal is for the kids to have fun. But if the kids have fun and they enjoy each other and they get to have friendship and bond and feel a sense of self-worth, feel connected, feel loved, feel cared for, the outcome on the scoreboard is always a reflection of that. You will get the best out of each athlete. The athlete will get the best out of themselves. And that's the irony of it. Why the hell are these people who are so consumed with money, power, and greed at all levels, particularly college and pro, why don't they get that? I mean, why can't they see that? What's stopping them? And that's what's really frustrating for me, being in this business.
Well, I mean, and it's not unlike in business. I'm working with a CEO right now, and one of the markets that one of his business units is in is down. So their numbers are down. I think there is a measurement challenge. It is easy to measure the scoreboard. Mm-hmm. It is easy to measure revenue. Mm-hmm. It's a lot harder to measure culture. Mm-hmm. It's a lot harder to measure growth. And so if I was going to play devil's advocate, Jerry, I would say, okay, we're not going to measure the scoreboard. What are we measuring? What would your answer be?
My answer is, why do you have to measure something that, wait a minute, that you intuitively know, I'm talking about knowledge, that you intuitively know is the right thing to do?
So how do you, and there's probably two sides to this. How do you as a coach know that you're doing a good job? And how does whoever holds the coach accountable know that they're doing a good job?
I ask every teammate at the end of each month or each week or each day or each hour, whatever, tell me if I'm doing a good job. What do I need to do to be a better coach for you? What am I doing that's working? What am I doing that's not working?
So
it's anecdotal data. It's not.
Yeah, right.
I'm not doing a study at the 0.05 level of significance. What I'm doing is I'm taking human data. And by the way, intuition is real wisdom, real knowledge based on
Completely.
experiences. Why can't we take that as proof that in this moment, in this situation, I do it with my kids. I've got 4 kids, and every one of them would walk through here, and unless I'm missing something, would say, you know what, Dad's doing a great job. I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for him and his openness and his love and his caring, and that was what really drove our train, and that means a lot to me. What are we going to do? Take a study of 1,000 kids? And I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Pete, I want to hear your answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, Jerry, so I agree with you, but I think from society's place, this is where I feel like CEOs have been fired because their market is down, not because their processes are bad or their culture is bad. And it's because we could really get into the space where people just don't want to take responsibility for decisions that they're making. So they just point to the scoreboard and say, that's why I'm doing it. Because if I had to make a judgment, right? If I have to make a judgment about the culture and the processes, then now that's on me as the judge. Like if I'm your boss and I fire you because your culture's bad or your processes are bad, that's now my judgment. If I fire you because your numbers are bad, that's not my judgment. I don't have to take responsibility. So I think there's a responsibility issue that sits here around the people that are making those judgments. Look at the scoreboard. I'm like, it's not my fault that I'm firing you, coach. Look at the scoreboard. Yeah. If I actually had to judge you on your processes and culture, now it is my fault. Now I have to take responsibility for that. So I do think, I think in at the elite level of sport, there's a lot of I don't want to take that judgment and be responsible for the judgment. So I just point to the scoreboard.
Yeah. And it's such a huge point. And this is this idea of, you sort of used the word, right? Society's scorecard, and I worked with the team the other day and says, how does society, how does your parents, your friends, your school, your whatever judge your success, right? And they say wins, championships, All-Americans, awards, blah, blah, blah. And then what brings you fulfillment? Family, spirituality, my friends, camaraderie, this amazing team, whatever. And those two things are not at all alike. Those two things are not at all aligned, right? And so if you're chasing society's scoreboard, you'll never find purpose and rarely find fulfillment. And your point is exactly 100% correct, that with the people holding these coaches accountable, whether it's an athletic director at a college or, whoever your boss is at the Olympic committee, if you only point to the scoreboard and they say, well, you didn't win a championship, and you say, well, and New Zealand had the best team they've ever had, so we were never going to win a championship, but the processes were good. The players played to their potential. Players exceeded what we thought they were going to do. And that's the thing. And it's really hard, because we've had conversations on here with college coaches, right? Who, at the end of a season, the athletic director is interviewing exiting seniors, some of whom didn't play, and say, yep, on my way out the door, I'm going to throw this coach under the bus. But that player in that moment doesn't necessarily know what's best for them.
Yeah, I think that comes back to, we have a measurement challenge in this space, right? So it can't be 2 bits of data. I think it's probably like a balanced scorecard that does include the outcome, but not only includes the outcome, right? So and then there's player feedback, and then there's probably some external assessment. There are some ways to be able to do this. The way I always measured my success, and I think, was I would ask players, what did you learn? How did you grow? Mm-hmm. And I think it takes a very strong coach in the way society looks at things right now to stay authentic to that model when the rest of society is looking around and taking score.
Mm-hmm. 100%. I want to just tell our readers, because We haven't really mentioned your book yet. This is your book. We've been talking about your book without mentioning it. And so I want to sort of bring it around here at the end, to the book called Leadership Shock. And everything we've been talking about in here, this authenticity and your authentic leadership model and all of this is in the book. And it was such a good read. And I was reading it on the plane a couple of weeks ago and just highlighting and folding pages and taking notes and stuff. And so let's tie the book into everything we've talked about, because these are sports coaches mostly listening here, but we've been talking about the same principles, and you've alluded to it back and forth, right? What is this? And I think the first thing maybe is, like, the book is called Leadership Shock. So what is leadership shock?
Yeah, I mean, it's great, and I appreciate the opportunity. And you're absolutely right. Like you know, I struggle to sometimes see the separation between my sports work and my business work now. I just see them as being the same thing. So I think coaches would still find this useful. But leadership shock is when someone gets into a role and fundamentally the way that they approach their previous roles doesn't enable them to perform in their new role. And so often people will see this when they're promoted and they get into a different context, and the way that they led previously is not sufficient. They have to evolve their leadership. But of course, the way that I led previously is the thing that got me successful, made me successful. It got me this new job. So letting go of the things that made you successful is a non-trivial activity, right? And so in leadership shock, people are very busy. Their teams are confused. They're fighting fires, but they can't actually drive. They can't lead. And so it's called shock in the same way the body goes into shock. Like, you're breathing, your heart's pumping, there's blood that's moving, but you can't actually do anything. And that's what leadership shock. And it often comes in that change of context where, people have to fundamentally change the way they view roles or the role that they're doing. I would see this actually in the sporting world, often when you go from an assistant to a head coach role. Like as an assistant, it's very, very different. And if you try to be a leader like you were an assistant as a head coach, it isn't going to work. Like things are just different as the head coach. And so this would be a way of helping coaches be more proactive and preparing for that next stage.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I think maybe what we've talked a lot about here is this authenticity and this purpose. And I love this part of your book when you talk about these essential steps for discovering your leadership purpose. So maybe you can share with some of our listeners some of those steps. And you had in there some of in the book, like, great questions to ask yourself. And I think this is so important, because whether you're the coach of a team or leading a program or whatever it is, or leading a company, if you can align your work with your purpose, that's going to be fulfilling, and it probably gives you the best chance of success as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the power of being aligned to your purpose is that you find that the work that you're doing is energy filling, not energy depleting, fundamentally. And I actually think there's power in making that intellectual connection. If you make that intellectual connection, you say, oh, this is something that links to my purpose. I actually think that will help you sort of fill your emotional tank. And I think what's been really interesting is we've talked a lot about fulfillment for the athlete, but we haven't talked a lot about fulfillment for the coach, right? We've talked around it a little bit. And so to me, it's, to really find your purpose, it really is about reflecting or being, metacognitive, which is the word that we use in the book, which is not just reflecting, but thinking about your reflection. Like, it's that next step. When are you most energized? When are you most fulfilled? What happens when, your energy is drained, right? When is it that you feel like things are most difficult? And when you investigate that and you reflect on your career, you can identify common themes that exist. Yeah, I feel like I'm being my best self in these moments. Oh, these moments are when, I'm really getting the team to connect. Okay, if that's a moment, like, that team connection is really important for you, then that's great. Or it might be, I get most fulfilled when I see the team execute some specific plays or approaches on the field. Oh, so actually implementing your game plan might be your purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, and then by the way, mine was always on the team development and the growth side. So I always had assistant coaches that were much better tactically than me,
mm-hmm.
that really thought about the game, where their purpose was really about understanding the game and helping the team apply. Because I think in your coaching staff, you need that balance. But that's where you can really find out what your purpose is, and you can find out how you can be really authentic as a coach.
Yeah. Oof. 100%. I mean, this is so important. And again, I encourage everyone to grab this book and, just going through those questions for yourself. And, at the end of it, you might really be aligned. You already know this intuitively, as maybe Jerry would say, that, yeah, I am aligned, because when I go to training, when we go to an event, I don't feel drained after. I feel like I feel filled, like, yes, that's why I do this. But these questions are great. And what you also say in there is like, this isn't a 10-minute exercise. This is something that, like, you really want to go deep, and you want to bring other people, 360 degrees around you who know you well, to sort of help you really dial this in, don't you?
Yeah, and it's a never-ending journey, actually. But yes, it is about taking a moment. Like, the hardest thing when I work with senior executives is actually trying to find the time for them to do the thinking.
Yeah.
And you might even find this as a coach, right? Is that, like, when do you actually stop and think? Like, when I coached at Penn State, the last couple of years I coached at Penn State, my business was doing really well. So I had to, like, empower my coaching team to do the coaching, because I wasn't there for half the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have weekly meetings, but the first half of that meeting wasn't about practice. The first half of that meeting was about us,
mm-hmm.
and about us sharing with each other, right? And I think having that community that you can build, so I think, number one, it's definitely engaging others. And then the second thing, it's this ongoing journey. At the back of the book, I think there's 4 case studies of clients that I worked with. And one of them, I worked with her when she was transitioning to a director. And then, there's we're bringing out a podcast with the book also called Leadership Shock. And in that podcast, she talked about how she just got promoted to VP for the first time. And she went back to her, like she still uses her authentic leadership model. Like, she goes back to it and uses it. It's a way of thinking about your leadership as much as it is like a framework. And to the point that some of the time my clients halfway through the process will be like, I got it. And I'm like, good, thanks, Pete. I'll call you if I need you. Like, it is a way of thinking holistically with multiple inputs about how you want to lead, versus it's a system versus it being like a little tactic. It's not like, oh, if I drink the right coffee, I'll be a better leader. Or if I stand the right way, or if I change the way I talk. It's a really systematic view about how you lead and how you want to lead.
Mm-hmm. Love it, man. I mean, Pete, this was such an amazing conversation. I think we could have gone on here for another hour and still barely scratched the surface. But I want to be respectful of your time and everything. Do you have, I want to give you sort of 2 things, right? Letting people know how they can connect with you, contact you, how they can get this book. And also, anything else we should have asked you, any other things that you want to talk about the book or anything like that?
Well, this has just been, I have to say, it's been a privilege to talk to both of you guys and sort of scratch my coaching itch. Like, yeah. I retired in 2017. I've tried to help my the under-8 rugby team that my 7-year-old plays in a little bit, although it turns out that coaching 5, 6, 7-year-olds is a lot harder than coaching national team players.
Yes.
So I'm like, that's where the best coaches are, I think, if you can do that. So I appreciate that. Look, the best way to find me is on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. I'll connect with you. You can sign up for my newsletter at petesteinberg.com. And also you can find Amazon, you can find the book at like all the major retailers, but you can definitely find it at Amazon.com. And I appreciate any feedback that people would like to give. We've talked about feedback. Then we need to be open to feedback online too. So any feedback that you have on the book would be great.
Yeah, Awesome. And
questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Questions that you haven't asked me. That's a really interesting one. I mean,
I was going to say, because your last comment of coaching 7-year-olds is harder than the Olympic team, I didn't want you to leave that with your last word.
well, I mean, I think that there's different levels of difficulty and different levels of capability that you have to bring to those moments.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was interesting. The first season that my daughter coached, I kind of like sat on the sideline, sort of not really with a hat and glasses, but tried to do it with a hat and glasses. And then the second year they came up and they were like, "Oh, you're Pete Steinberg. Can you coach the team?"
Mm-hmm.
And the very first practice I had the ball. I was like, and my daughter was 5. I'm like, "Who wants the ball?" And everyone said, "I do." And I gave it to my daughter and she ran down and scored. And then I was like, "Who wants the ball?" "I do," they all say. So I gave it to my daughter. She ran down and scored. "Who wants the ball?" I passed it to someone else. My daughter gave me this look of betrayal and just melted down and walked off the field. And of course, I have to keep coaching. And that night, my wife asked "Why were you so sad at rugby?" And she said, "Dad broke my heart at rugby."
Oh.
So I'm like, that's hard. That was a hard one. So there's probably one question that I would ask, and you may not have that much context, but I stepped away from coaching in 2017, and I really haven't done anything on the coaching side. So there's a question that I would ask you that then I reflect on myself. So if you stopped coaching, Jerry, I feel like you're always going to coach. So that's why I said if. John, you're young enough, you might have a chance to stop. What would you miss about it? And then I'll answer what I do miss about it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. If you're asking that, Jerry, you want to go first?
No, go ahead, John.
I mean, it's the relationships, it's the people. I mean, I did stop for a while when I started my Change the Game project business, and then I got back into it, coaching my own daughter and her team when she was about 12, so a little older. Yeah, and in between, in those sort of 3 years, I would get asked to go do coaching clinics, right? And go to coaching conferences and run a session in front of 200 coaches. And there was nothing. Like, I was like, I just don't like coaching anymore. And then I jumped back in with a bunch of 11-year-old girls. And I was like, I love coaching. And this is what it is. And it was the relationships that I missed. So that's an easy question for me.
I think John, sorry, John, you're on your way to discovering your purpose with that, with what you just said, right? Like, as a coach, I think that was great.
Yeah. And I'm here to say, after 50 some odd years, I know what my purpose is, and it's real clear. And this is what I would miss. I'm not in this to make a living, although I make a good living financially, but that's not why I'm doing it. Why I'm doing it is to make a difference. And what I would miss more than anything is those sessions, those opportunities, the conferences that John and I do, the clinics, my individual work with clients and what have you. It's important. It gives me meaning. I want to call it a life with meaning. And I would miss that. I would probably find some other meaning. But what I tell people, they say, God, you're not going to retire. And I said, no, I'm going to rewire and refire. And so I'm constantly rewiring and refiring as I age to find ways that I can continue to have not just an impact, but a huge difference in the lives of people. And that sums it up. That's the whole thing. That's the only reason why I'm still doing it.
Yeah. And I think, Jerry, I'm with you on that. One of the reasons why I don't miss coaching that much is I get some of that from the work that I do now.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like I'm just doing it with corporations. I guess if you said, I miss the moments when I could step back and I could watch the team and I could just see the joy, and I could just see them having this experience that was so special.
Yeah, you could feel it.
I could feel it. Yeah, I don't get that. I get the impact. But that joy and that connection that you get through sport, that is There are these moments where, and I was, as I think about this, I'm not in it. Like I am not in that moment. I am watching that moment. And I just like, there's a sense of accomplishment when you see the team be a team in a way that just is so joyful and such an amazing experience. That's the bit that I can't get out of the work that I do with corporations. I can get the impact. I do team development stuff, and I definitely have seen teams evolve, but there's something about sports teams and the connection that they build that's just unique. And that's why you have relationships with people that you played on your team 30 years ago, but you don't have relationships with the people that you were on the business team 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
It's because of those experience, that collective experience that they have together.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I kind of miss that myself, actually.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So good. So good. Pete, thank you so much. This was a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I have tons of notes and, questions and, segues for 2 more podcasts with you in the future. So,
I love this. This is getting me interested in coaching again.
There we go, man.
So if we have 2 more, maybe I'll end up coaching again. But
yeah.
I know, and I learned a lot from you guys too. I really appreciate the opportunity for the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being on the Way of Champions.
Thanks, Pete.
Jerry, that was an amazing conversation we just had.
Yeah, he's a brilliant mind, and maybe I'm saying that because he talks a lot like we do. Sort of a backhanded compliment for us, but he really gets it, and he's been out there in the trenches at the highest level, and he's telling us right now today that it works. Not only does it work, but the other method doesn't work. The old method, the transactional transformation is where it's at, and he's totally on board with that.
Yeah, 100%. And it was, when we hit stop, we were talking to him, and he's like, I've basically been out of coaching, and he goes, but this makes me think about all these things I miss and I love. And,
Yeah.
For all the people listening to this, I mean, this is, getting connected with your purpose. If you're feeling like you're not, is such a critical thing. It's such an important thing.
It's critical in the sense that it sustains your life. Without being aligned with your purpose and knowing every day when you walk into that locker room or you walk on the field, why you're really there. And I think it's a great question. You put your shoes on, you get out of the car, and you walk onto the soccer field. Ask yourself, why am I here? And really get in touch with that. It has nothing to do with the game on Saturday. It has to do with you going out there and you're developing the minds and hearts of these young kids. And he even mentioned that. I have a notation down here. It said that in his way of looking at coaching, it's all about people, individual development and growth. And what an opportunity I always seem to have when I walk into a room of athletes or coaches, that I'm here to provide that opportunity for growth and expansion, human development, human capacity. And that's what he was talking about. And that comes right back to, you got to constantly know why you're doing this. It's hard. It's easy to get caught up in all the other stuff, the parents, the coaches, the organization, CEOs, whatever you're in, business or high level sports. You feel it at the professional level in sports. I know coaches who feel that from the ownership and what have you. And it's not healthy, and it's not sustainable. And so the coaches they really, when all that's being thrown out there on the table, they need to be able to sit back and say, you know what, this is why I'm really doing it. Yeah. And my intention is pure. And if they don't like it, so be it.
Yeah, 100%. My big, I have so many takeaways. I love this idea of, and we've talked on the podcast, giving, when you give feedback, will you take some feedback from your player back, right? How can I be a better coach from you? I really love that idea of, when they announce their team, that the non-selected players had this agreement that they would go to the person who was selected in front of them, like, how can I help you this week. Perform your
I
best. Like,
I love
super
that. What a great
powerful.
simple statement, but unbelievably powerful.
Unbelievably powerful.
Yeah.
And then, just this nuance. He talked about the 2014 versus 2017 World Cup and the difference between a great culture and a performance culture, and
Hmm.
how that performance culture had to be a little more ruthless,
Hmm.
right? And there was
Hmm.
just a big thing with one of the US national teams in a different sport recently about not taking a player because of, they wanted to be a great culture more than a performance culture. And I think what you and I do is we try to have people be great performance cultures. That's the
Yeah.
best, right? That's the best. But then you make that decision, right? In professional sports, if I have to pick between one or the other in a moment, what are we choosing? Right. And they were choosing, right? We can have a great culture, we can have a performance culture, right? But in this moment, when these players 6 months before the World Cup come and take 7 spots on this team, what takes priority? And in 2017, they said taking the best players. And that's a hard thing.
Winning. Yeah.
Winning.
Winning the game.
And when you're
And
playing in a World Cup, I mean, maybe it
yeah.
should,
Yeah.
you know,
What an
probably should.
idea.
What
Yeah.
an idea, So
One of the things I wish I got to ask him, although again, using my intuition, I would say that he would totally go off on this in a positive way. He was talking about authenticity and being genuine and what have you. I wanted to ask him how he felt about vulnerability. I didn't notice that was written in the book, but then again, I didn't do a thorough job of reading the whole thing. But I would imagine that he would see vulnerability as being a real plus, don't you?
Mhm. Oh yeah, for sure. For
Yeah.
sure. I mean, because
Yeah.
especially when that's part of your authentic self,
Yeah.
and then not. Yeah. Whew, so much good stuff. So everyone, thank you for listening again. The book is Leadership Shock, and you can get it where all books are sold. His website is Pete Steinberg, STEINBERG.com.
Mhm.
And like you said, connect on LinkedIn being the best. Um, and I will put all these in the show notes for you as well.
Yeah.
So, last word as we sign off, Jerry. We're getting
Yeah.
ready for our conference. Super
Yeah.
excited about that.
Hmm. Hmm.
August 9th, 10th, and 11th. So everyone, please get registered. You can still save $100. And you can also bring your staff and save 50% per coach as well, which is a great deal.
Yeah. Plus, you have something else you wanted to tell the audience, didn't you?
Of course, we always end the same way,
Yeah.
right? And I think we just spent an hour and a half talking about influence, didn't we? And how we
It
can
was
positively influence
totally,
people.
you could call it the show of influence
The show of
today.
influence.
Yeah.
So, everyone, thank you for listening. And remember, your influence is never neutral. So, go out there, take what you learned here today, and use your influence for good. We'll see you again next week.